Good morning, everyone, and welcome to My Pain Birth My Purpose Women of Faith in the Bible series. On this morning, I will introduce to you Hannah. Her story is found in 1 Samuel, the first chapter, the first verse through the second chapter, and the 11th verse. Now, Hannah was infertile. Being infertile means that she could not have children. And she had been infertile for a long time. In Hannah's culture, it was customary that when a person had children, that it was a symbol of wholeness, especially for females. All right? So, especially having a boy child, a man child, it was symbolic of being whole and being able to pass on a legacy. Now, Hannah wanted a son from her husband, Elkanah. But Hannah had to endure scornful treatment from his second wife, whose name is Peninnah. Peninnah had children, and you can only imagine how Hannah felt when she heard Peninnah playing with her children, possibly nursing her child, her newborn baby, or just simply speaking to them, singing to them. Now, Hannah was distraught. Peninnah made Hannah feel like she was less than a woman because she was barren. All right? Peninnah teased her. Kind of like when children go, nah, nah, boo, boo. She was teasing Hannah. And it made her feel incomplete as a woman and inadequate as a wife. Now, Elkanah again had two wives, Hannah and Peninnah. And I'm going to read to you 1 Samuel, the first chapter, starting from the second verse. Now, Elkanah had two wives. One was called Hannah, and the other Peninnah. Peninnah had children, and Hannah had none. Year after year, this man went up from his town to worship and sacrifice to the Lord Almighty at Shiloh, where Hophni and Phinehas, the two sons of Eli, were priests of the Lord. Whenever the day came for Elkanah to sacrifice, he would give portions of meat to his wife Peninnah and to all her sons and daughters. But Hannah he gave a double portion because he loved her, and the Lord had closed her womb. Verse 6 says, and because the Lord had closed her womb, her rival kept provoking her in order to irritate her. This went on year after year. Whenever Hannah went up to the house of the Lord, her rival Peninnah provoked her till she wept and she could not eat. Elkanah, her husband, would say to her, Hannah, why are you weeping? Why don't you eat? Why are you downhearted? Don't I mean more to you than 10 sons? I'm going to stop right there. Hannah had a lot of disappointment. She had to hear the laughter and the joy and the excitement of her rival Peninnah. But God knew Hannah's heart. Hannah remained faithful. This is why we're discussing her today. In spite of Peninnah's judging, taunting, scornful comments toward her, Hannah chose to remain faithful to God through it all. She continued to go to the tabernacle with her husband Elkanah to pray, even though her prayers went unanswered. She kept having conversations with God. That's what prayer is. Prayer is a conversation with God. She kept going to the tabernacle. She kept praying, going back home, enduring all those evil things that Peninnah was telling her. But God, Hannah was determined to stay faithful to God, even when it looked like God had shut the door on her petitions to him for a baby. She prayed through her pain. But here again, her pain is about to birth her purpose. All right? So now let's look at the rest of the first part of her story. Verse 9 says, once when they had finished eating and drinking in Shiloh, Hannah stood up. Now Eli the priest was sitting on a chair by the doorpost of the Lord's temple. In bitterness of soul, Hannah wept much and prayed to the Lord. See, she remained faithful to God in spite of what she was going through. And she made a vow, saying, O Lord Almighty, if you will only look upon your servant's misery and remember me, and not forget your servant, but give her a son, then I will give him to the Lord for all the days of his life, and no razor will ever be used on his head. As she kept on praying to the Lord, Eli observed her mouth. Hannah was praying in her heart, but her lips were moving, but her voice was not heard. Eli thought she was drunk and said to her, how long will you keep on getting drunk? Get rid of your wine. Verse 15 says, not so, my Lord. Hannah replied, I am a woman who is deeply troubled. I have not been drinking wine or beer. I was pouring out my soul to the Lord. Look at Hannah being faithful in spite of what she's going through. Do not take your servant for a wicked woman, she said. I have been praying here out of great anguish and grief. See here, Hannah's pain is about to birth her purpose. Eli answered, go in peace, and may the God of Israel grant you what you have asked of him. See, this is where we have to speak, decree, and declare, no matter what it looks like. We have to continue to trust God through the process. Now, verse 18 says, she said, may your servant find favor in your eyes. Then she went away and ate something, and her face was no longer downcast. Verse 19 says, early the next morning they arose and worshiped before the Lord, and then went back to their hometown at Ramah. Elkanah lay with Hannah, who was his wife, and the Lord remembered her. So the Lord will remember you if you stay faithful to him like Hannah. So in the course of time, Hannah conceived and gave birth to a son. She named him Samuel, saying, because I asked the Lord for him. What a wonderful story. Hannah remained faithful to the Lord. She continued to go to the tabernacle with her husband, and she continued to pray. Her faith in God is what made the difference in God turning his ear to hear his child. What do you do when the Lord says, not now? We must continue to trust God like Hannah. And we must continue to pursue him in spite of adversity and in spite of our pain. When God finally answered Hannah's prayer, she was overjoyed. Hannah was so happy and faithful to God that she dedicated her son Samuel back to him because she acknowledged that Samuel was a gift from God. Remember that God will answer our prayers if it is in his will. Stay faithful to the Lord and use Hannah's example as an example of being faithful to God in spite of an unanswered prayer. Now, I relate to Hannah because I had a miscarriage on May the 7th of 2001. I lost my baby girl, and I was just as devastated as Hannah was when Penina was teasing her. I dedicated my oldest son, Brandon, to God, and then got married. Even though it seems backwards, and it was, I got married and still wanted more children. After I had the miscarriage, I began to pray and say, God, I want another child. I want another child. I would go to church, and there would be a little girl. And almost every Sunday, I managed to sit near her at church, and she would look at me and play with me as I continued to pray every month, anticipating me being pregnant. So finally, I kind of got a little discouraged, but I kept praying and asking God for a child. In January of 2003, I went to the doctor for a routine visit with my OBGYN. On that day, about 3 minutes after taking a blood test and a urine test, the nurse came back and told me that I was pregnant. I'm here to tell you that if you remain faithful to God, He will answer your prayer. I'm happy to say that I have a son named Jordan Michael Benderson now, and he was the baby that I prayed for after the miscarriage. How will you dedicate your prayers to God for the things that you desire? That is my question to you today. I love this story of Hannah because it makes you think about all the things that we want and we desire. But will you dedicate what you prayed for back to God? My name is Pastor Leanita Hunt, and I've enjoyed this time with you. And I encourage you to read the story of Hannah in 1 Samuel, the first chapter, the first verse, through the second chapter and the 11th verse in your own time. Thank you so much, and I hope you enjoy this series of Women of Faith in the Bible.